In this video, I am going to go over the brain and eye dissection for you to help you learn the structures for your exam and to help complete labs 8 and 9. This is the brain and the eye, and I'm going to attempt to do this one-handed. Let's see how it goes. Alright, so we can see that we've got a brain that's cut in half. I don't think I should turn it that way. So we have a brain that's cut in half, and we have a brain that is whole. The brain that is cut in half, I've kept this beautiful glossy white membrane on it. This is the meninges, particularly the dura mater, which means tough mother, and it is tough. And it surrounds the brain, and it creates these sinuses to help drain blood. It anchors the brain to the ethmoid bone, helps to prevent the brain from jiggling around in your skull. And I've removed the meninges from this brain so we can see the gray matter a little bit better as we go through the structures. So we've got 4 major regions of the adult brain. This is a sheep brain, and it's a mammal, just like we are, and so it's got, you know, the big brain here, the big cerebrum. It's got the Diencephalon, the midbrain, and the brainstem, and the cerebellum. So those are those major regions of the brain that I was going to tell you about, and I just did. So let's take a look at the cerebrum first, this big brain cerebrum. It has 2 hemispheres, as you can see, and the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And I've cut it by slicing down the longitudinal fissure here. I've cut through some of the thinner meninges. We've got, you know, 3 layers of meninges, not just the dura mater. So I've cut through those meninges and kind of pried the brain apart so you can see that longitudinal fissure that separates the 2 halves of the cerebrum. And then we have the cerebellum. It's another brain region, the little brain, cerebellum, and this one is separated from the cerebrum by the transverse fissure. So let me do that slower. This is the cerebrum, longitudinal fissure, cerebellum, transverse fissure. Now this little tail you see sticking out here is the spinal cord, and so I kind of tell my students to use the cerebellum as a guideline wherever the cerebellum stops and the white matter tracts continue to move posteriorly. That's the spinal cord there. So cerebrum, cerebellum, spinal cord. Now we've got lobes that we've got to go over, and fortunately they're going to have the same names as the bones that we looked at. So this is the frontal lobe. So this would be the anterior part of our brain where the nose would be and the eyeballs. Okay, so this is the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and then on each side here is the temporal lobe. So let's look at it this way. So this is our spinal cord, so that's the posterior part. This is anterior, so there would be our nose. So there's your frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. Those are the only ones you need to know. And now let's look at the interior of the brain here. I cut this brain in half, and I wanted to show you the corpus callosum, which is going to connect the right and left hemisphere of the brain. It's a white matter tract that allows for communication to go from right to left side. And we've got some ventricles in here, and then this thin membrane, the septum pellucidum. And around here we have the fornix down here, and things like that you see in your worksheet, okay? Inferior to the corpus callosum and the fornix and this, ventricle, we have our diencephalon. Got a little bit of extra flesh here, I apologize, but we can see the thalamus, gorgeous here and here. So the thalamus is this round structure, okay, and it is the sensory operator of the brain. All sensory information except for the sense of smell come through the thalamus first before going to the appropriate region of the brain for sensory processing. So that's your thalamus right there, your sensory operator. On this side right here, this is good. I've got the epithalamus intact still. It's also called the pineal gland because it looks like a little pine cone. Oh, I'm shaking, sorry. And so that's the pineal gland there, or the epithalamus, and it's called the epithalamus because it sits above the thalamus, okay? So I hope you can see that right there. That's your pineal gland. Very, very delicate structure. See, I had removed it from there. It went with this side of the brain, the right side of the brain. So thalamus, epithalamus, thalamus, and that's where your epithalamus would be. So down here, beneath the thalamus, is the hypothalamus, okay? So there it is, beep, right there, okay? So this is from the same brain. These are just the right and left halves. Can kind of get oriented here. Thalamus, epithalamus, and then this is the hypothalamus right there. So that's that big boss of the autonomic nervous system that helps to regulate all kinds of homeostasis. And it is connected to the pituitary gland. So the nice thing about the brains that have the meninges on them is the pituitary gland is still there. Look at the size of that thing. If you remember in the bones, we have the sella turcica that helps to house the pituitary gland. It rests in there because the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland work to support the autonomic nervous system and the endocrine system. So there you have it. That is the diencephalon. So the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus, that region is the diencephalon, meaning through the brain. Dia is through, and encephalon is the brain. Anterior to the pituitary gland, you can see this part of the optic nerve, okay? So that's going to be the optic chiasm, where there's going to be a crossing over of some of the optic neurons as they go to the visual cortex in the brain, so that it helps give us some stereo vision there, okay? So that's the optic chiasm. All right, moving posteriorly towards the end of the brain, we've got our midbrain here, which I've made it so ugly. I'm so sorry. But we can see, if I move that flesh away, see the brain is very delicate. This here, okay, in the midbrain, this is part of the Corpus Quadrigemina. This will be your superior colliculus. And you can see where it kind of got botched right there. That's your superior colliculus. And then inferior to that is the inferior colliculus. And it would be right there, basically. That would be it, underneath or inferior, obviously. There, you can kind of push on it and see it. So again, I apologize for that. Another view of the Corpus Quadrigemina is here. So you can kind of pull it down and see it's got a little butt there. It's mooning you. So the big butt cheeks that you see here and here are the Corpus Quadrigemina superior colliculus, and then the kind of long bar underneath, if you can see that. I'm going to pull it apart real good. That butt right there that I'm squishing on there, that's the inferior colliculus of the Corpus Quadrigemina. So corpora means body. It's like a corporation is the major body of a company. So corpora is body, and then of course quadrigemina, there's 4 of them, 1, 2, 3, and 4. The top one is superior reflexes of vision. So superior colliculus is visual reflexes, and inferior colliculus is auditory reflexes. And then you can see like the pineal gland to get you oriented right there. There's that pineal gland. So there'd be the thalamus in here, and there's your corpus callosum and all that stuff. So hopefully I did justice to the midbrain in that way, the Corpus Quadrigemina. And the midbrain continues all the way down in here. It's actually got quite a bit of stuff in there that we'll talk about in lecture, but just know those Corpus Quadrigemina, superior and inferior colliculi. And now let's move down to the brainstem. So the midbrain oftentimes is included as part of the brainstem, even though it comes from a different embryonic origin, tit for tat. But this is the pons right here. Do you see this kind of belly that sticks out. That's because there's a lot of fibers here that connect the pons and the cerebellum to the rest of the brain, and so it's not so pretty, but that's it. It's going to have a little belly. We can see it here as well. Oops, excuse me. See that kind of, if we look, you see that belly right there, how it just kind of sticks out a little bit. It's posterior to the pituitary gland. There'd be mammillary bodies underneath that, for those of you who study that, but this is the pons right here. So I always think of pituitary and then pons. So that's your pons, and then those of you who are studying mammillary bodies, they are under, they're going to be like under the pituitary gland. So you see how there's a cranial nerve there? The mammillary bodies are under there, but I digress. Pituitary, pons. This is the optic chiasm as well that I've showed you. That's the optic chiasm where a lot of the optic nerves cross over. There's about 1 million neurons in each of the optic nerves, and about, half cross over and go to the opposite side of the brain, and then the other half stay. They stay ipsilateral, and that half crossing over and half staying the same gives us stereo vision. Okay, so I hope you guys are good with the pons. It's going to be this little belly. That's the best view of it I can see right there, and it connects to the cerebellum. This is the arbor vitae. People say it all kind of different ways. Vitae, vita, vitae. But the tree of life is what this is, and it's the white matter fibers that are going to be communicating, with the primary motor cortex, the basal nuclei, and the pons will help to bring things. There will be cerebelloduncles, all kinds of stuff in this area, okay? And then this is the medulla oblongata, everybody's favorite, and it stops. So remember, the spinal cord is here. This is where the spinal cord starts. We want the medulla oblongata to stay in the brain. That's why it's part of the brainstem. And this is it here as well. So it's, in between the pons and the spinal cord. Oh man, you can see the central canal real well there. And then if we look at our brain here, this is that medulla oblongata. It's real fat. This is a big area. Big nerves come through here. Pyramidal tracts from your motor cortex cross over here. And then of course there's also, reflex centers for breathing and heart rate and such. So pituitary gland, pons, I've got dura mater in the way there. So pituitary gland, pons, medulla oblongata, spinal cord. Pituitary gland, pons, medulla oblongata, spinal cord. This one had the better one. Pituitary gland, pons, medulla oblongata, spinal cord. Pituitary, pons, medulla oblongata, spinal cord. And you can see the temporal lobes really nice here. Trigeminal nerves, optic chiasm, optic nerves. So while we're looking at this view here, these are the olfactory bulbs, cranial nerve, number one, the bulb part. This is the cluster of nerves that come into the brain. And then I keep mentioning tracts, fiber tracts. So, it's basically, the tracts are the nerves that are actually in the cranium, in the brain. And so this is the optic or olfactory tract here. It goes towards that olfactory cortex. So the olfactory bulb and the olfactory tract. And then of course this is that temporal lobe, which will have olfactory cortex deep in there, okay? So olfactory bulb, olfactory tract. This is the optic nerve, optic chiasm, pituitary gland, trigeminal nerves, pons, medulla oblongata, spinal cord. And that is it for the brain there. I hope I did that justice. Now we can move over to the eyeball. Woo-hoo. I'm just going to go ahead and do these together because this really just takes 5 seconds. So this is the cow eye, and it's looking at you here. So this is your cornea. All right, now it's been glossed over because of the preservatives, so it's cloudy. But you can see the pupil and the lens, that kind of ball looking structure is the lens, and then the iris would be the colored part of the eye. So we'll take a look at that in a second, but that's what it would look like if you can, you know, visualize it and notice that there's pressure there. That's because of the aqueous humor, which is water in the eye. This is the sclera of the eye. So cornea and then sclera. Sclera means hard and tough. So notice all the muscles that are around the eye here. The cows have 4 muscles that move their eyes up and down, left and right. We have 6, so we can roll our eyes. And then we have our optic nerve back here. In the sheep, if you know, we have our optic nerves here, so, you know, that would connect. So this is a cow eye and a sheep brain, and there's that optic nerve, okay? And then there's also adipose tissue. There's fat that helps to cushion the eyeball in the skull, the orbits, sockets of that cow eye and your eye. All right, so the eye is a very incredible part of the nervous system. It is a sensory organ that is, you know, devoted to vision. And so we have that cornea here, and then we have the sclera, the muscles and the adipose tissue, and then the optic nerve coming out back here. So let's take a look at the internal aspect of the eye here. So I cut it. Let's see if I can open it up here. All right, so this is the lens here. I'm doing this one-handed, but you can pop the lens out. And generally the lens, or normally the lens would be clear unless you have cataracts, or in this case, you've been soaking in preservative for a while. So it's looks like a little marble here, and it is going to refract light as it comes in from the cornea. It'll hit that lens and bend it. I'm grossing you guys out now with this eye jelly, I'm sure. And then here we have, I'm going to invert this. You can see the pupil and the iris. Let's see if with one hand I can get this iris off of here. Let's see if I got some dexterity. Oh my goodness, look at that. All right, so we've got our cornea and our sclera, and then our lens. You've seen I've lost some of that aqueous humor there, okay, that water that gave us pressure. Okay, it's now right here. And this is the pupil. So the pupil is the hole, okay? And it is what actually, you know, lets that eye in, and so it dilates and constricts if it's going to let more or less light in, respectively. And then this dark colored structure around it is actually a couple of muscles, and those are called the iris. And they've got this neat kind of undulation, like the gills of a mushroom pattern. Those are those ciliary bodies that will connect to the lens and help the lens to stretch as well as accommodate for farsighted or nearsighted vision. So cornea, sclera, the pupil is the hole, the lens is the marble behind that hole, and then this is the iris. Okay, this jelly here is called the vitreous humour. I'm just going to dump it out so I don't mess with the retina. Bloop. So that is the vitreous humour here, and it also helps to refract light. So we've got a lot of types of, light honing structures here. We bend light with our cornea, we let the light come through our pupil, and we open and close the pupil with our iris, and then the light bends again, sharper, with the lens, and then the vitreous humour helps to carry that light, further bending it towards the retina. So this is the retina. Okay, the retina is a tan structure, because remember how I said that the eye is just a very elaborate nervous organ, just like the brain is. And so this is the neural tissue in the eye. So this is where the nerves come in and connect. And do you see where they're cinching together? That's going to be where that optic nerve starts. So that, oh God, all that fat. There's the optic nerve, okay? All right. And so this is actually like your blind spot. And then around that will be a very important part called the macula lutea or fovea. It's like in the middle of the fovea. Anyway, of course I can't see that here, but it's where you have a cluster of neurons that help you see your vision the sharpest, like your color vision and such. Humans are lucky. We see a lot of color. Not all animals see a whole lot of color, as you guys are aware of, and it's because of the different types of nerve cells that we have in our retina and what wavelengths of light they can respond to. Now, cows might not be able to see color like humans, but cows have something humans don't have. Cows have a tapetum lucidum, which is a reflective structure that sits on what we call the choroid. Now, we have the choroid, which is going to be a vascular structure that nourishes, you know, the retina and, you know, the eyeball and such. But our choroid is just going to be, you know, this black color, and it will reflect red light, or it'll reflect red from the vascular tissue, and that's why sometimes we have that red light reflection in pictures for humans. But for other animals like cows and deer and cats and dogs and even spiders and animals that see a lot at night, they have this extra layer of reflective material called the tapetum lucidum to help bounce the light back onto the retina a second time so that they can get, you know, sharper vision at night. So they might not be able to see color as well, but they are able to see motion and shape, even in dim light, very efficiently. And so, you know, it helps both, you know, predator and prey to hunt and to escape in dim situations. So that's what the tapetum lucidum do. So here we see again the corneum, sclera, pupil, iris, lens. Where's that jelly? Where did it slide down to? Oh, there it is. Vitreous humour, retina, tapetum lucidum, optic nerve, brain. One more time. Cerebrum, cerebellum, spinal cord, frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe, longitudinal fissure, transverse fissure, cerebellum. Again, that's spinal cord. Turn it over. Olfactory bulbs, olfactory tract, optic chiasm, optic nerves, pituitary gland, trigeminal nerves, pons, medulla oblongata, spinal cord, dura mater, that meninges there, corpus callosum, right here, fornix, ventricle and septum pellucidum, thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary gland. This is where that epithalamus was beautiful. And then this is a pretty midbrain. Ugh, this one's pretty. So that's the corpora quadrigemina. So that's the superior colliculus, inferior colliculus, and then of course the rest of the midbrain. Pons, medulla oblongata, spinal cord, cerebellum, arbor vitae. And I believe that's about it. So good luck.